Valentine's Day had always been special for Nathan and me. This year, we had planned a romantic dinner at Girl and the Goat, a popular upscale restaurant in Chicago. The streets were buzzing with couples, laughter, and glowing red and pink lights. The crisp February air made us walk a little closer together. As we arrived, Nathan gave his name to the hostess. "It'll be a 45-minute wait," she said. "We'll text you when your table is ready." "Let's go for a walk while we wait," Nathan suggested. "What about the mini-golf across the street?" I offered. Before I could take a step, a cold shiver ran down my spine. That's when I saw them, a couple sitting on a bench near the entrance. They were staring at us. Not in a casual way, not even blinking. The woman had a wide, unsettling smile, while the man beside her simply observed us, his face completely blank. My stomach tightened. "Nathan, do you see that?" He turned briefly, his brows furrowing for a second before shrugging. "Probably just some weirdos. Let's go." We had barely taken a few steps when the woman suddenly stood up and raised her hand toward us. "Excuse me." My body tensed. She approached with that same eerie grin, stopping just a foot away from me. "You two are such a beautiful couple. My husband and I are photographers, and we'd love to do a free photo session with you." Nathan and I exchanged glances. Thanks, but we're actually just waiting for our table," he said politely. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity," she continued, not missing a beat. Her tone was too eager. Something felt off. "We don't have a business card, but our studio is just 5 minutes away. We could even drive you there." My gut screamed at me. Nathan didn't hesitate this time. "No, but thank you." The woman's smile remained frozen, but her eyes darkened slightly. "Suit yourself, sweethearts, but trust me, you're missing out." She stepped back and sat beside her husband again. His eyes never left us. The moment we stepped inside the restaurant, I finally felt like I could breathe again. "That was weird," I whispered. Nathan nodded. "Yeah, and I don't think it's over." I glanced back through the glass door. They were still watching us. The restaurant was packed, and the noise helped ease my nerves. Nathan and I tried to laugh off what had happened, but something about them stuck with me. We ordered drinks and scrolled through our phones, waiting for the text. "Let's kill time at the mini-golf," Nathan suggested. I hesitated, but staying inside felt suffocating. "Yeah, okay." The mini-golf place was surprisingly empty, which was weird for Valentine's Day. But honestly, it was a relief. For a while, I forgot about the couple. Then I heard the entrance bell ring. My heart sank. I turned around, and there they were, Mrs. Holloway and her husband. She scanned the room, then locked eyes with me, and her lips curled into a slow, knowing smile. My hands went cold. I nudged Nathan, whispering, "They're here." His whole body tensed. What the hell? They acted like they didn't notice us, like this was just another coincidence. "I don't feel comfortable staying here," I muttered. Nathan nodded immediately. "Let's wait in the car." We grabbed our things and made our way to the exit. Just as we reached the door, I felt it. Someone right behind us. "Crazy how we all ended up here, huh?" Mrs. Holloway's cheerful voice sent a chill down my spine. For the first time, her husband spoke. "We should play a little game. Holloway versus Rods." Nathan's body went rigid. That was his last name. We never told them. Nathan grabbed my hand. "We're leaving. Now." As we hurried out, I dared one last glance back. Their smiles had vanished, but their eyes followed us. We sat in Nathan's car, locked inside, barely speaking. "They know my last name, Emma," Nathan said, voice tight. My stomach churned. His phone buzzed. "Restaurant, your table is ready." We ate in silence, trying to convince ourselves this was just a really disturbing coincidence. But when Nathan went to the restroom, I caught a glimpse of movement near the entrance, someone peeking from behind a pillar. I blinked, and they were gone. I convinced myself it was just in my head. After dinner, we headed to Nathan's apartment in Oak Park, To get there, we had to drive through a long stretch of road surrounded by trees. I checked the rearview mirror, headlights not too close but not far enough. Nathan, he tensed. Yeah, I see it. I swallowed hard. What if it's them? He exhaled. Let's find out. Nathan pulled into a CVS parking lot. The car behind us kept going. A huge wave of relief washed over me. See? We're just paranoid. We both got out to use the restroom. When we came back, the car was gone, and somehow that felt worse. Nathan and I exchanged a look before driving back onto the dark road. 5 minutes in, I heard it. A loud pop. Nathan slammed the brakes. The car jerked to a stop. What was that? Nathan's face drained of color. Both my front tires just blew out. A heavy silence filled the car. Then Nathan whispered, "They did this." I froze. Nathan killed the engine, turned off the lights and locked the doors. Then he grabbed my wrist. "Get out. Now." What? Why? There's not much time before they get here. My stomach dropped. Behind us, an engine rumbled, getting closer, and then a voice. "You took too long." My blood ran cold. "Mrs. Holloway." Nathan yanked me out of the car, pulling me into the darkness of the trees. I could barely breathe. My legs struggled to keep up as we ran, dry leaves crunching beneath us. Behind us, the car came to a slow stop. A door creaked open. And then, silence. Nathan pressed me against a tree, whispering in my ear, "Stay low. Stay quiet." My whole body was trembling. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, like they wanted us to hear them. "Why are you hiding?" Mrs. Holloway. Her voice was mocking, almost amused. Nathan squeezed my hand. He was shaking too. Then, a metallic scrape, like a knife dragging against wood. My pulse pounded in my ears. For the first time, I heard Mr. Holloway speak. His voice was low, empty. "Come out now, and we'll make it quick." I clenched my jaw to keep from screaming. Nathan moved closer to my ear. "We have to split up." My stomach lurched. No way. "Emma, listen. If we run together, they'll catch us both. If we split up, one of us can make it out." I was shaking my head. Tears burned my eyes. "Please don't make me do this." The footsteps got closer. Nathan looked at me, his eyes filled with something painful. Then he whispered, "Run." I tore through the trees, my heart hammering. Branches slashed against my arms, but I kept running. Behind me, I heard them moving too, chasing me. Then, a voice, too close. "Oh, Emma." My blood ran cold, they knew my name. I ran harder. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. Then, a glow in the distance. Headlights, my only chance. I burst from the trees, stumbling onto the pavement. Bright lights blinded me. Sirens blared. Police cars. A sob ripped from my throat. Behind me, I heard rustling in the trees. I turned just in time to see two shadows retreating. Mrs. Holloway and her husband, backing away without a word. And then, they were gone. Nathan stumbled out of the woods moments later, his face pale, his hands shaking. The officers rushed to us asking questions, but I could barely speak. Nathan told them everything. The dinner, the mini-golf, the stalking, the tires slashed, the voices in the woods. The officers exchanged glances before one of them finally said, "You're not the first." A chill ran down my spine. Similar reports, different couples, different names, but always the same method. No one had ever caught them. The officers searched the woods. They found nothing except for one thing, a camera. Inside, photos of Nathan and me. Some from the restaurant, some from the mini-golf, some from earlier that day, before we even left the house. The next few days blurred together. Nathan's car was towed and inspected. Someone had placed spikes behind the tires. Deliberate. Planned. We changed our routines. We installed security cameras. But the fear never left. Who were they? What did they want? Why us? We never got answers. No one ever found the Holloways. And even worse, 4 years later, every Valentine's Day, I still receive a single envelope in the mail. Inside, a Polaroid, a photo of Nathan and me from that night. No return address, no fingerprints, just one sentence written on the back. You looked perfect that night. It all started in early February. I had just started talking to this girl, Sarah, on Instagram. Nothing unusual, just some casual conversations about music, college life, and random memes. But after a few days, we hit it off. By the end of the week, I had her number. A couple of days later, we were on Snapchat. And by the weekend, we finally met in person. I remember thinking how lucky I was. Valentine's Day was right around the corner, and I didn't have to spend it alone this year. The thought of having someone to share the day with felt nice. But then something happened that I wasn't expecting. A few dates in, Sarah brought up something that had been bothering her. She had a stalker. His name was Ryan, a guy a few years older than her from a class she took at Hunter College last year. At first, he was just another classmate, but after a group project, he started following her around campus. She brushed it off at first. Maybe he was just socially awkward. But then the texts started. At first they were normal, friendly even. Then as time passed, they became obsessive. Sarah never blocked his number. She said she wanted to see how far he would go. That part kind of unsettled me, but I understood why. Ignoring him made it easier to track his behavior. When I asked why she was telling me this now, she said, "Because he started texting me again. And this time, he knows I'm seeing someone." She showed me the texts. It started small, messages she ignored. Then they became more intense. Then, on February 12th, she found a single red rose on her doorstep, and a text followed right after. "Hope you liked my gift." That was when she decided she had enough. She finally replied. A long, detailed message telling him to leave her alone, that she had moved on, that he needed help. She said she didn't hear from him after that, until the next day. A heart-shaped locket was in her mailbox. A tiny note inside said, "You're mine, forever." At this point, I was feeling uneasy. Sarah tried to act calm, but I could tell she was shaken. I asked if she wanted to go to the police, but she hesitated. "I just don't want to make things worse," she said. I told her that if this guy reached out one more time, I'd go to the police station with her myself. But things got worse before that could happen. That night, while Sarah was at home, she noticed something outside her window. Across the street, standing in the rain, was a man in a hoodie. He wasn't moving. He was just staring. She couldn't tell if it was Ryan, but the moment she turned off the lights, her phone buzzed. "You really think he can protect you?" That was the moment Sarah truly got scared. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She kept checking her phone, staring out her window, expecting to see someone still standing there. But by the time the sun came up, the street was empty. I could tell she was trying to act normal the next day, but she wasn't fooling me. Every time her phone buzzed, she flinched. Every time we walked past a reflective surface, she glanced over her shoulder. I wasn't going to let this ruin our plans. I reassured her that we'd go out as planned. I wanted to make sure she felt safe, and honestly, I wanted to keep an eye on her. We had already made reservations for the River Cafe, a beautiful restaurant in Brooklyn with a view of the Manhattan skyline. A perfect Valentine's date. Except, something felt off. As we were eating, Sarah went pale. She wasn't looking at me anymore. She was looking past me. I turned my head casually and scanned the room. Then I saw him. A man in a black hoodie sitting alone at a small table near the bar. He wasn't eating. He wasn't talking. He was just there. and for a brief second I swore he was looking in our direction. Sarah let out a nervous laugh. "What if that's him?" she whispered. I tried to shake it off. "It's just some guy. Don't worry about it." She nodded, but she wasn't convinced, and neither was I. A few minutes later, the man stood up and left the restaurant. Not even a minute after he was gone, Sarah's phone buzzed. She hesitated before looking at the screen. I could already see her hands shaking. When she finally checked, her face drained of all color. I leaned over to read the text. "You look beautiful tonight." We left immediately. Walking back to my apartment in Brooklyn Heights, Sarah was holding onto my arm tighter than usual. She kept glancing behind us. "I swear someone's following us," she whispered. I looked around, but the streets were mostly empty. Just a few couples walking, a guy walking his dog. Nothing seemed out of place. Still, I didn't like the way she was acting. By the time we got inside, Sarah was visibly shaken. I locked the door behind us, double-checking that all the windows were shut. I told her to sit down, try to relax. After a few minutes, things started to feel normal again. We sat on the couch, close, finally able to focus on each other without the lingering fear of being watched. And then, thump. We both froze. It came from outside, from the backyard. Sarah pulled away from me instantly. "You heard that, right?" she whispered. I nodded. I wasn't sure if it was an animal, the wind, or something else. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. "Want me to check?" She didn't answer, but she was staring at me wide-eyed. I slipped on my slides, grabbed a heavy flashlight from the counter, and stepped outside. I expected to hear a raccoon scurrying away, but the night was dead silent. Too silent. Then I saw it. The trash bins were knocked over, and the bushes near the fence, they were moving. I stepped closer, my heartbeat pounding in my ears, and that's when I saw him. A tall figure standing between the bushes, Ryan. I locked eyes with him for half a second before he realized I had spotted him. Then he charged. I barely had time to react. He lunged forward, pushing through the bushes, coming straight at me. Adrenaline kicked in. I swung the flashlight, hitting his shoulder as he stumbled forward. "Stay down," I yelled, but he wasn't stopping. I tackled him to the ground before he could get to the house. I shouted for Sarah. "Call the police, now!" Ryan struggled, trying to break free, but I had him pinned. He was shaking. His breathing was erratic. Then Sarah came outside. She gasped. "Oh my God, well, it's him!" She had seen him outside her apartment. She had seen him at the restaurant. And now, he was on my patio, trying to get inside. Ryan wasn't giving up. He thrashed beneath me, jerking his arms and trying to twist out of my grip. His breathing was erratic, wild, desperate. I could feel the adrenaline surging through my body, but I refused to let him go. "Stay down," I yelled again, tightening my hold on him. But then, something flashed in his hand. A knife. I barely had time to react before he swung it. The blade grazed my arm, burning hot as it sliced through my sleeve. I stumbled back and Ryan took his chance. He tried to scramble to his feet. Sarah screamed. That sound alone sent me into full survival mode. Before Ryan could lunge again, I kicked his legs out from under him, sending him crashing back down to the ground. His knife skidded across the patio. I jumped on top of him, pinning him down with everything I had. Sarah stood a few feet away, her phone clutched in both hands. "They're coming. The police are coming." Ryan twisted beneath me, his face contorted with rage. His voice came out as a strained, breathless whisper. "She's mine." My stomach turned. I pressed my forearm against his chest, forcing him still. "You're done," I said. "You hear me? You're done." Flashing red and blue lights lit up the backyard. The cops were here. 2 officers rushed in, weapons drawn. One of them shouted for me to step back. I raised my hands immediately, backing away as they grabbed Ryan and yanked him to his feet. His hoodie was ripped, his face was scratched from the bushes, but he still had that twisted, empty expression. They pinned his arms behind him, slamming him against the fence to cuff him. Sarah was crying. I wrapped my arm around her, trying to steady her. My own body was shaking from the adrenaline. One of the officers turned to us. "You two okay?" Sarah nodded, but she couldn't speak. I showed them the texts, the photos, the locket, the rose, everything. The officer's face darkened. "We're booking him on trespassing, harassment, and attempted assault," he said. "If you want to file for a restraining order, now's the time." Sarah didn't hesitate. "I want one." Later that night, we sat on my couch in silence. Everything had happened so fast. The reality of it all was sinking in. This guy had followed her for months, left gifts, sent messages, stalked her at a restaurant, and then showed up at my house with a knife. And the worst part, he had been watching us the entire night. Sarah buried her face in her hands. "What if he comes back?" she whispered. I squeezed her hand. "If he does, he's going straight to prison." I wanted to believe that, I really did. But a few days later, I got a text from an unknown number. "This isn't over." Valentine's Day is supposed to be a day of love, a time to show appreciation for that special person in your life. This year, I wanted to do something different, something unforgettable. So, I planned a surprise picnic at Lake Tahoe for my girlfriend, Claire. We had been dating for almost 3 years, and if there was one thing we both loved, it was being outdoors. I had found the perfect spot a few weeks earlier while hiking. A small, secluded clearing overlooking the lake, just a 15-minute walk from the main trail. It was peaceful, hidden from the usual foot traffic, and had a breathtaking view of the water. The weather was perfect. The sun cast a golden glow over the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the crisp mountain air. As we walked along the trail, hand in hand, Claire was already excited, asking me where we were going. I told her it was a surprise. When we finally arrived at the spot, her eyes widened in awe. The view of the lake stretching endlessly under the evening sky left her speechless. Then she noticed the picnic setup, soft blankets, candles, and all her favorite foods. "Ryan," she whispered, "this is amazing." I smiled, proud of my effort. Everything was going perfectly. But then, just as we sat down, Claire suddenly tensed. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice lower now. I listened for a moment but heard nothing except the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. "Babe, it's just the wind," I reassured her. She didn't look convinced, but she nodded. We went back to eating, laughing, and enjoying the view. At that moment, I thought this would be a Valentine's Day we'd never forget, for all the right reasons. I had no idea how true that would be. Claire kept glancing over her shoulder, clearly still uneasy. I tried to ignore it, focusing on making the night perfect. Then, just as I was pouring us some wine, she froze. "Ryan," she whispered, "I swear, there's someone standing in the trees." I turned my head toward the darkened forest behind us. Tall pines towered over the clearing, their branches thick and tangled. Beyond the first few feet, it was almost pitch black. I squinted, trying to see what she was talking about, but there was nothing. "Babe, there's nobody there," I said, forcing a chuckle. "It's just shadows." Claire wasn't buying it. She kept staring, her breathing unsteady. "Please, just check," she insisted. I sighed but got up anyway, walking slowly toward the tree line. As I peered into the forest, I felt a slight chill crawl up my spine. It was so dark in there, so silent. And then, a branch snapped. I stopped. My pulse spiked, but I told myself it was probably just a small animal. Still, something about the way Claire was looking past me, her face pale and eyes wide, made me turn around faster than I wanted to. "Ryan," she said, barely above a whisper. "There, right there. You don't see that?" I followed her gaze, and at first I saw nothing, just trees and shadows. But then, a shape, a figure, motionless. It was barely visible, blending so well with the darkness that I almost convinced myself it wasn't real. But as I stared, my stomach clenched. It moved, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift. like a shoulder rolling back. I swallowed hard. My throat was dry. "Babe," I said, keeping my voice calm, "we should probably pack up." Claire didn't move. She was frozen in place. That's when the figure stepped forward. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body felt locked in place as I watched the figure take another slow, deliberate step forward. Claire grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my skin. "Ryan, we need to go," she whispered, her voice shaking. The figure stood at the edge of the tree line now, just far enough away that I couldn't make out any details. Just a tall, shadowy outline. The way it stood, unmoving, sent a cold dread through my body. I forced myself to think. If this was just some random hiker, why wouldn't they say something? Why were they just standing there? Then, as if to answer my thoughts, the figure took another step forward. That was it. I grabbed Claire's hand. "We're leaving. Now." We turned toward the trail, but then I realized something that made my stomach drop. My car keys. They were still in the picnic basket. For a split second, I considered running back for them. But then, behind me, branches snapped loudly, closer this time. I made my decision. Forget it. We run. Claire didn't hesitate. She bolted down the rocky path, and I followed close behind. The forest seemed darker now, as if the sun had set all at once. Our footsteps pounded against the dirt, kicking up dust and leaves. Behind us, we heard movement. Not the slow, creeping steps we had seen before. Fast, heavy footsteps. Whoever was out there was chasing us. Claire was sobbing, barely able to breathe. I wanted to comfort her, tell her we'd be okay, but I didn't have the breath to waste. We just had to keep running. We hit the main trail, but the feeling of safety never came. The footsteps were still behind us, the sound of cracking twigs and shifting leaves keeping pace. Then, suddenly, silence. Claire slowed, gasping for air. I stopped too, my chest burning. I turned around. The trail behind us was empty, no sign of anyone. The only sound was the wind in the trees. But something wasn't right. I could feel it. That eerie sensation of being watched, of something just beyond your sight. Then, from deep within the forest, a whisper. I couldn't make out the words. It was low, almost distorted, like someone trying to speak through a broken radio. Claire pulled out her phone. "No signal," she whimpered. Of course. That's when we heard it. A rustling sound, much closer this time. Then something stepped onto the trail. The figure, and now in the dim moonlight I saw it more clearly. A tall man wearing dark, tattered clothes, his face obscured by the shadows of his hood. And worse, he was holding something in his hand. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed Claire's arm and yanked her forward. "Run!" She didn't hesitate. We sprinted down the trail, our legs burning, our breath ragged. Behind us, the man followed. His footsteps were fast and deliberate, but what terrified me most was that he didn't make a sound. No heavy breathing, no grunts of effort, just the sound of his boots crunching the dirt and twigs beneath them. We rounded a bend and I spotted the parking lot in the distance. Almost there. But Claire suddenly tripped. She let out a sharp cry as she hit the ground hard. I skidded to a stop and turned back just in time to see her scramble to get up, her ankle twisting painfully beneath her. "Come on, Claire. We're almost there," I shouted, pulling her up. She winced but forced herself to move, leaning on me as we staggered forward. Then I looked back. He was right there, only 20 feet away now, his hooded face still obscured. The object in his hand, a rusted, jagged hunting knife, glinted under the dim light of the moon. My heart slammed against my ribs. We were out of time. Then, headlights. 2 police cruisers sat at the entrance of the parking lot. I had never felt relief like that in my life. "Help!" I screamed, waving my arms frantically. One of the officers stepped out, shining his flashlight in our direction. The other reached for his radio. Behind me, I heard rustling, but when I turned back, the man was gone. The forest was silent again. The officers rushed over to us asking what happened. Claire was still crying, barely able to form words, so I told them everything. The shadow in the woods, the chase, the knife. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. "We were already looking for someone out here tonight," one of them said. He went on to explain that earlier that morning, a jogger had found a man lying off one of the nearby trails, bruised, bloody, barely conscious. The victim said he had been mugged, attacked by a man in a dark hood. My stomach twisted. The officers immediately searched the woods, combing through the trails and even sending out a K-9 unit. They never found him. We gave our statements, and they drove us home that night. I barely spoke on the ride back, my mind stuck on what could have happened if we hadn't reached the parking lot in time. Claire and I never returned to that spot. In fact, we haven't gone hiking at all since that night, and even now, every once in a while, I think about the way he moved. Silent, calculated, like he had done this before, like he would do it again. And worst of all, he's still out there. I've never been particularly good with women. It's not that I'm painfully shy or anything. I just never know the right thing to say. Conversations fizzle out fast, and I always overthink everything. While some guys in college had this natural confidence, I was the guy who just watched from the sidelines. My twin sister, Lisa, was the exact opposite. She was popular, outgoing, and always in a relationship. We used to joke about how different we were, but it never really bothered me. In fact, some of my best childhood memories were just us teasing each other. Fast forward to my 22nd Valentine's Day, and I was feeling lonelier than ever. Maybe it was the cold New York winter, or the fact that Lisa was spending the night with her boyfriend, but for some reason, that year hit me harder. "Why don't you try online dating?" Lisa suggested over FaceTime. I hesitated, but finally agreed. She helped me set up my profile, pick some decent photos, and write a bio that wasn't completely cringeworthy. I figured it was worth a shot. Over the next few days, I got some matches, but most conversations led nowhere. Just as I was about to give up, I got a message from Jessica. She was gorgeous, way out of my league, and yet, she was interested. Jessica made talking easy. She laughed at my dry humor, responded quickly, and actually seemed interested in what I had to say. That never happened. At first, I thought it was a scam, maybe a bot, or someone messing with me. But then she asked to FaceTime. I hesitated. What if she wasn't real? What if she was just using some random girl's pictures? When the call connected, I almost dropped my phone. It was really her. "Hey, stranger," she said with a smile. We talked for nearly an hour. She told me she had just moved to the city and didn't know many people. She loved old horror movies, had a dark sense of humor, and somehow made me feel comfortable in a way no girl ever had before. At the end of the call, she grinned. "So, want to go on a date?" I was stunned. Girls like her didn't ask guys like me out. But there she was, waiting for an answer. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, I'd love that." We made plans for the next night, Valentine's Day. She had a special idea for our date. "Let's meet in Central Park, near the Bow Bridge. It's beautiful at night." It wasn't the usual dinner and a movie plan I was hoping for, but I didn't care. This was actually happening. A girl like Jessica wanted to spend Valentine's Day with me. That should have been my first red flag. Valentine's Day arrived, and I could feel the nervous energy in my chest. I wasn't used to this, getting ready for a date with someone who actually seemed interested in me. I picked out a decent outfit, nothing too fancy but not too casual either. Lisa called me before I left. "You sure about this?" she asked. "Meeting a girl you barely know in Central Park at night?" I rolled my eyes. I FaceTimed her. "She's real. It's just a date." "Just be careful," she said, "and text me where you are." I promised I would and grabbed my keys. By the time I got to Central Park, it was almost 9 p.m. The cold air bit at my skin as I walked toward Bow Bridge, a famous spot in the park where couples took romantic photos. Jessica was already there, standing by the railing, gazing at the water. She was even more stunning in person. Her dark hair framed her face perfectly, and she had this effortless confidence about her. She smiled when she saw me. "Hey, you actually showed up." I chuckled. "Of course, why wouldn't I?" She shrugged playfully. "A lot of guys back out when things seem too good to be true." Another red flag. We walked along the path, the soft glow of the city skyline reflecting on the water. Jessica held my hand, her fingers ice cold. "So what's the plan?" I asked, hoping we'd just grab coffee or something after this. Her smile widened. "I was thinking, let's take a little detour." She pointed toward a path leading deeper into the park, away from the streetlights. I hesitated. "You scared?" she teased, tilting her head. "No," I lied. I followed her down the darkened trail, trying to push away the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. That's when I noticed something weird. A few yards ahead, two figures stood by a lamppost, barely moving. It was late, too late for people to just be standing around. Jessica acted like she didn't see them. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Lisa. "At Central Park, something feels off." A minute later, she replied, "Get out, now." I stopped walking. Jessica noticed and turned to me. "What's wrong?" she asked softly. My heart pounded. I think I should go," I muttered, stepping back. She didn't move. She just smiled. And then, from the darkness behind me, a voice whispered, "Too late." Before I could react, something hit me hard in the ribs. I stumbled, gasping for air. Two guys appeared out of nowhere, grabbing me by the arms. I struggled, but they were strong. Jessica just stood there, watching. "Jessica?" I croaked. She knelt down, brushing my hair back like we were some old lovers. "You were so easy," she whispered in my ear. "You really thought a girl like me would want a guy like you?" Her voice was soft, almost affectionate, which somehow made it worse. I fought against the hands holding me, but before I could scream, something cold pressed against my throat. A knife. "Relax," one of the guys said. "We just want your stuff." They emptied my pockets, wallet, phone, keys. One of them chuckled. "Let's have a little fun with him first." My stomach dropped. I struggled harder, but the grip on me tightened. One of them punched me in the gut, sending me to my knees. My vision blurred as pain shot through my ribs. Jessica crouched beside me, tilting her head. "You really should have listened to your sister." My sister, Lisa. She knew something was off. One of the guys grabbed the back of my jacket, yanking me to my feet. They dragged me toward a tree, tying my hands behind me with what felt like zip ties. Jessica took my phone, smirking as she scrolled through my messages. She turned the screen toward me. "You told your sister where you were?" I clenched my jaw. "Smart," she admitted, "but not smart enough." She tossed my phone into the lake. Then, without another word, they left. I was alone, tied to a tree, bleeding, and then, flashing lights, red and blue, a voice shouting my name, Lisa. The moment I saw the flashing red and blue lights, a wave of relief washed over me. I tried to shout, but my voice was weak. My ribs ached. My wrists burned from the zip ties and my head pounded from where I'd been hit. Seconds later, two police officers ran toward me, their flashlights blinding in the darkness. "He's here," one of them called out. "We found him." Another voice, Lisa's voice, came through the cold night air. "Oh my God, is he okay?" I felt hands on my wrists, cutting through the restraints. My body collapsed forward, and someone caught me before I hit the ground. Lisa dropped beside me, grabbing my face. "Ethan, talk to me." I tried to say something, but all that came out was a weak, pained grunt. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice shaking. "You're safe now." The officers asked me what happened, but I was barely able to form a sentence. I just kept thinking about Jessica's smile, the way she had looked at me, not with hate, but with amusement, like this had been a game to her, like I had been just another mark. In the days that followed, I pieced together what happened. Lisa had been at a party when she overheard a group of guys talking about some loser they were planning to lure and rob at Central Park. They were laughing about it, calling it a Valentine's gift. At the time, Lisa thought they were just drunk idiots messing around. But when she got my text, her stomach dropped. She called the police immediately and raced to the park. She saved my life. But the strangest part? The police never found Jessica. Her online profile vanished. The phone number she used was disconnected. There was no record of anyone matching her description living in the area. They caught one of the guys, one of the 4 who jumped me. But he refused to give up any names, and Jessica's name never came up. It was like she had never existed. 4 years later, I still have nightmares about that night. Not about the attack, not about the pain, but about her. The way she smiled when she watched them beat me. The way she whispered in my ear before disappearing into the night. Like she was something else. Something worse. I haven't used a dating app since. And I haven't celebrated Valentine's Day either. Because every year when February 14th rolls around, I wonder if she's out there waiting for the next guy, the next easy target, the next fool, just like me. During the spring semester of 2019, I was studying at the University of Illinois Chicago, UIC, living in a small studio apartment in the Buckingham, a well-known student housing complex near downtown. I had transferred from a smaller college a few months earlier, and even though I had made a few friends, I still felt like an outsider in the city. I had gone through a breakup a few weeks before, nothing dramatic, just one of those slow-burn relationships that fizzled out when both people stopped trying. Still, with Valentine's Day approaching, I started to feel that familiar weight in my chest. Being alone wasn't the worst thing in the world, but knowing that everyone else would be out celebrating with their significant others made it sting a little more. That's when I made a stupid, impulsive decision. I reactivated my Tinder account. Not that I was desperate for anything serious, but I thought maybe I could find someone to grab dinner with, watch a movie, and not spend the holiday alone. Most of the people I matched with were into the whole bar hopping scene, which wasn't really my thing. But then I came across Lily. She was different. Her profile was simple. Just a few pictures of her smiling with her head tilted slightly, her red hair catching the sunlight. There was something almost ethereal about her. Her bio just said, "Just looking for good conversation and a quiet night." That was enough for me. I swiped right. Lily and I matched almost instantly, and within minutes we were chatting. She told me she had just moved to Chicago a few months earlier and was still getting used to the city. She wasn't into clubs or big parties. She preferred quiet places, good books, and classic horror movies. I remember thinking, finally, someone on the same page as me. When I asked about her plans for Valentine's Day, she laughed and said, "Sitting at home with takeout and a bad romance movie." I jokingly suggested we could upgrade her plans. Maybe grab a burger, see a movie, and just hang out. She agreed almost too quickly, but I wasn't about to overthink it. We met at a 24-hour cafe near Millennium Park, a safe and public place. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. She looked even more striking in person. Shoulder-length, wavy red hair, deep green eyes, and a delicate frame that made her seem almost fragile. She wore a simple black sweater and jeans, nothing flashy, nothing trying too hard. She smiled as I sat down, and for a moment it felt like this was going to be just a normal date. The night started off perfectly. We talked, laughed, and shared stories about our most awkward dates. She was charming, a little shy, and had this way of making eye contact that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. After finishing our drinks, I asked if she wanted to watch a movie back at my place. She hesitated for just a second before nodding. "Yeah, I'd like that." It wasn't until we were walking back to my apartment that I started to notice the first red flag. She wasn't nervous or excited like most people would be. Instead, she was studying me, watching me carefully like she was trying to memorize every little detail. At the time, I shrugged it off. But looking back, I should have listened to my instincts. We arrived at my apartment around 11:30 p.m. The streets were quiet, the cold Chicago air making everything feel strangely still. I unlocked the door, motioning for her to step inside. "Nice place," she murmured, looking around. Her eyes seemed to scan every detail of the apartment. The lock on the door, the small kitchenette, the bookshelf in the corner. She walked over to it and ran her fingers along the spines of my books. "You like horror?" she asked, pulling out a worn copy of The Shining. "Yeah, it's my favorite genre," I admitted. She smiled. "Mine too." For a while, things were normal. We sat on the couch, scrolling through Netflix until we found an old horror film. She curled up next to me, and at that moment I felt like I had actually met someone I clicked with. But as the movie played, I started to notice something strange. She wasn't reacting to the jump scares or creepy moments. She just stared at the screen, her expression completely blank. At one point, I made a dumb joke about the killer's outfit, expecting her to laugh. Instead, she just turned to me and said, "Do you ever wonder what it's like to kill someone?" I forced a chuckle, thinking she was joking. Not really." "Why?" She tilted her head slightly, like she was genuinely thinking about it. "I don't know," she said. "Just curious." That was the first real warning sign. By the time the movie ended, it was past 1 a.m. Snow was falling outside, and Lily glanced at the window before turning to me. "It's freezing. Do you mind if I stay the night?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want her to stay, but because something about the way she asked made my stomach twist. But I didn't want to seem weird, so I nodded. "Yeah, of course." We got into bed, and she immediately curled up next to me. I was exhausted, and within minutes I started drifting off. At some point in the night, something woke me up. I wasn't sure why at first. The room was dark, silent, except for the faint hum of the heater. But then I realized Lily wasn't next to me. I sat up, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. My first thought was that she had gone to the bathroom. But then, I saw her. She was standing in the far corner of my bedroom, facing the wall, not moving, not making a sound. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Lily?" I whispered. No response. I turned on the bedside lamp, the soft yellow light flooding the room. She didn't react. I swallowed hard and slid out of bed, stepping cautiously toward her. Something about the way she stood there felt unnatural. I reached out and gently placed my hand on her shoulder. She spun around at an inhuman speed, her face inches from mine. Her eyes were wide, her pupils so dilated they looked completely black. And then she screamed. Not a normal scream. A blood-curdling, guttural shriek that sent a shockwave of fear through my entire body. She started hitting me, her fists pounding against my chest and shoulders. It wasn't the hardest hits, but it was wild, frantic, uncontrollable. I stumbled backward, tripping over the edge of the bed and falling onto the mattress. She stood over me, breathing heavily, her face completely emotionless. Then, just as suddenly as it started, she stopped. Without a word, she grabbed her clothes, ran to the door, and disappeared into the freezing Chicago night. I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to process what the hell just happened. Then I noticed the smell, something rotten, putrid. I followed the scent to the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar, and when I pushed it open, my stomach twisted in horror. The shower curtain was ripped down, my medicine bag was spilled across the floor, and on the mirror, there were words smeared in some kind of dark, foul-smelling substance. I didn't even want to think about what it was. The word said, "He still watches." I slammed the bathroom door shut and stumbled back into my room, my hands shaking. The smell still clung to my nostrils, thick and sickening, but I couldn't focus on that right now. My heart was racing and my mind was trying to piece together what had just happened. Who the hell was Lily? What did that message mean? He still watches. I couldn't stay there alone that night. My instincts were screaming at me that this wasn't over. I grabbed my phone and called my best friend Chris, the one who had classes with her. "Dude, I need you to come over now." Luckily, Chris was still awake and lived just a few blocks away. 15 minutes later, he was at my door. I barely let him inside before I started explaining everything. The corner incident, the screaming, the smell, the words on the mirror. Chris listened, his face slowly shifting from confusion to something more serious. When I pulled up the one picture I had of Lily, the Snapchat one with the filter, and asked if he recognized her, his expression darkened. "I've never seen her before." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean? You're in the same class." Chris shook his head. "No, man. There's no girl named Lily in my class. I would have noticed her." A thick, heavy silence filled the room. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. If she wasn't in his class, who the hell was she? Chris stayed the night. We locked the door, closed the blinds, and put a chair under the doorknob just in case. Somehow I managed to drift off into a restless sleep. But at 3 a.m., I woke up again. This time, it wasn't Lily. It was the sound of my front door handle slowly turning. I froze. Chris was still sleeping next to me on the couch. The door handle kept turning. Slow, deliberate, testing the lock. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loud I thought whoever was outside might hear it. Then, after a full minute, the noise stopped. I crept toward the peephole, pressing my eye against it. But there was no one there. The next morning, Chris and I left the apartment together. I wasn't about to stay there alone. I spent the entire day digging for information about Lily. No social media, no class records, nothing. I even went through missing persons reports online, not really expecting to find anything. And then, I did. A small news article from 2 years ago. Family still searching for missing college student Lillian Thompson. I clicked on the link. There she was. The same green eyes, the same red hair, the same delicate face. I felt sick. The article said she disappeared in 2017 while attending a college in Indiana. Her roommate reported that she had started acting strange before she vanished, staring at walls, whispering to herself, sleepwalking. And the last place she was seen? A dorm room mirror. Her roommate said she woke up one night and saw Lillian just standing in front of it staring. She whispered something, reached out toward the glass, and then she was gone. No trace, no body, just gone. My hands were ice cold. I thought about the bathroom mirror in my apartment, the words she left behind. He still watches. I shut my laptop and took a deep breath. Who was he? And more importantly, was Lily really gone? For a week, nothing happened. No strange noises. No knocks at the door. I started telling myself that maybe she was just crazy. Maybe I had just met a deeply disturbed person who snapped. But then, one night, I got a Snapchat notification. A message from an unknown user. Just a single picture. It was a photo taken from outside my apartment window at 3 a.m. No caption, no name, just the picture. I blocked the account, deleted my Tinder, and I haven't gone on a dating app since. But sometimes, late at night, I still feel like I'm being watched. I was 22 years old when I worked the overnight shift at a 7-Eleven in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It was one of those jobs that didn't pay much, but was good enough to cover rent. The store was located on Central Avenue, right off the freeway. One of those places where you'd get a mix of drunks, truckers, and night owls stopping for coffee and snacks. Since I had no plans for Valentine's Day, I volunteered to cover the shift. It wasn't like I had someone waiting for me at home, and honestly, I preferred making extra cash over pretending not to care about the holiday. The night started out just like any other, slow, quiet, and boring. By midnight, I had finished all my tasks. restocking shelves, sweeping the floor, and counting inventory. The only thing left to do was kill time, so I sat behind the counter, scrolling through my phone, occasionally glancing at the security cameras. At 1:30 a.m., the familiar ding of the front doorbell echoed through the store. A man walked in, tall, broad-shouldered, with messy dark hair. He looked about my age, maybe a little older. From what I could tell in the dim lighting, he was handsome in a rugged way, but something about him made my stomach tighten. I forced a friendly smile. "Hey, how's it going tonight, sir?" He stopped near the entrance, his dark eyes locking onto mine. His expression shifted slightly, and then he spoke. "Emily, is that you?" I froze. My heart did this weird little flip, and for a second I felt completely thrown off. How did he know my name? That's when it hit me. It was Colton, a guy I went to high school with. We were never close, but we had always been friendly. Same grade, same school, but different crowds. I remembered him as the quiet kid, the one who kept to himself but was always polite and well-spoken. Before I even had time to react, he smiled and took a few steps forward. "Wow, it's really you," he said, his tone warm. "I haven't seen you in years." Instinctively, I smiled back. "Colton, yeah, it's been forever." I wasn't the type to be standoffish, so I gave him a quick, friendly hug. We started catching up, small talk mostly. He told me he had just moved back to town after spending a few years out of state. I told him about my boring life, my job, and how I was just figuring things out. Then, his expression darkened slightly. "I just went through a breakup," he admitted, "about a week ago. Been having trouble sleeping, so I've been walking around a lot at night. Thought I'd stop in." I frowned. "I'm sorry to hear that." "It's fine," he said with a shrug. "Honestly, seeing you just made my night. It's good to run into an old friend." There was something sincere about the way he said it. I actually felt bad for him, so I told him he could hang out for a while if he wanted. For the first 10 or 15 minutes, everything was normal. We laughed about old high school memories, talked about mutual friends, and just caught up on life. But then he asked to use the restroom, and that's when everything started to feel off. Colton disappeared into the restroom, and as soon as the door clicked shut, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Something about the whole situation wasn't sitting right with me. Sure, running into an old classmate wasn't impossible, but at 1:30 a.m. on Valentine's Day of all nights, and the way he had recognized me instantly, like he had been waiting for this moment, felt too convenient. Curiosity got the best of me. I pulled out my phone and searched his name on Facebook. I expected to see the usual: vacation photos, maybe a couple of group shots with friends. Instead, I found a half-empty profile, barely any posts. What stood out were the photo albums, one in particular. For her. My stomach twisted as I clicked on it. The album was filled with pictures of me. Old pictures, some from high school, some from years ago, and some I didn't even remember taking. The weirdest part? Many of them weren't even from social media. How did he get these? I kept scrolling, my hands shaking. Then I saw the symbols. Scattered between the photos were images of knives, dark scribbles, and strange carvings. Some looked like pentagrams, others like letters I didn't recognize. There was one picture of a notebook page with my name written over and over in different styles. I locked my phone immediately. The restroom door creaked open. I looked up just in time to see Colton stepping out. But something was different. His smile was gone. His eyes looked darker, colder. As he walked toward the counter, I suddenly realized I was alone. I forced myself to act normal. "Everything good?" I asked, my voice a little too forced. Colton didn't respond right away. He just stood there looking at me. Then he said it. "I'm so happy I found you again, Emily." His voice was lower now, almost like a whisper. I swallowed hard. "Yeah, crazy coincidence, right?" He stepped closer, placed both hands on the counter. "You don't understand," he said, his tone more intense. "I've been looking for you." I felt my body go rigid. Looking for me? I let out a nervous laugh. Well, here I am. We belong together. The way he said it was so matter-of-fact, so final, that for a moment, I wondered if he truly believed it. That's when he took off his jacket. Then in one slow, deliberate motion, he pulled off his shirt. I felt the air leave my lungs. His torso was covered in tattoos, dark, jagged symbols inked across his chest and stomach. But one tattoo stood out, right under his collarbone, was my name. Emily. Tattooed, permanently. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a knife. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. The blade in his hand wasn't huge, but it was sharp. Too sharp. The way it caught the dim fluorescent light made my stomach churn. Colton ran a finger along the edge, staring at me with a blank expression, his lips curling into something that was almost a smile, but not quite. Then, still looking at me, he slowly tapped the knife against his tattoo, the one with my name. "Do you see this, Emily?" His voice was quiet, disturbingly calm. "You were always meant to be mine." I tried to respond, but nothing came out. Think, Emily. Think. If I ran, he'd be over the counter in seconds. If I screamed, who would hear me at this hour? I forced a nervous laugh. "Listen, Colton, I think you're confused." His eyes darkened. "No, I'm not." I took a tiny step back. I have a boyfriend." That was a lie. But I needed something, anything to make him stop. For a second I thought it worked. His face twitched, like he was processing the words. But then, slam. His hands hit the counter hard, making me jump. "Don't lie to me," he snapped, his breathing getting heavier. "They all lied to me before, but I won't let you do that to me, Emily." His fingers tightened around the knife handle. I was trapped. And that's when it happened. The front door dinged. Someone was coming in. The moment the doorbell rang, something shifted in Colton. He didn't flinch, didn't turn his head. His dead eyes never left mine. A man walked in, tall, broad, mid-40s, wearing a worn-out jacket. A truck driver, judging by the smell of diesel and coffee that clung to his clothes. The stranger barely had time to register what was happening before Colton lunged forward, one foot already moving toward the counter. But the trucker was fast. "Hey! Hey!" His deep voice boomed through the store as he rushed toward us. Colton barely had time to react before the man slammed into him, shoving him backward with brute force. Colton hit the ground, the knife skidding across the floor, but he didn't stay down. With unnatural speed, he scrambled back up, his face twisted in rage, his body tense like an animal ready to pounce. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I hit 911. Before I could even speak, Colton let out a scream, a horrifying guttural sound, and tried to jump over the counter. But the trucker grabbed him again, this time slamming him into a shelf, sending candy and snack bags flying everywhere. "Stay down, you psycho," the trucker yelled. Colton struggled violently, but the man held him there, pinning his arms against his sides. I could barely choke out the words to the dispatcher. "Hey, he has a knife! I need help! Send the police now!" Colton stopped struggling. For the first time, he actually turned to look at me again. His breathing was heavy, his face blank. Then, as if possessed, he grinned. "You can't keep us apart forever, Emily." His voice was eerily calm, as if none of this had happened. The sound of sirens tore through the silence outside. The red and blue lights flooded through the store windows, casting eerie shadows across the aisles. Within seconds, 2 officers burst through the door, weapons drawn. "Don't move!" one of them barked. Colton didn't fight. He didn't scream. He just stood there, hands raised slightly, a twisted smile still plastered on his face. One officer grabbed him while the other retrieved the knife from the floor. As they pinned him against the wall to cuff him, Colton turned his head, locking eyes with me one last time. "I'll find you again, Emily," he whispered. "This isn't over." A shiver ran down my spine. The officers led him outside, stuffing him into the back of a squad car. Even as they shut the door, his vacant eyes never left me. I stood there, shaking, barely aware of my surroundings as the officers questioned me. The truck driver, who introduced himself as Mike, stayed by my side the entire time. "If I hadn't walked in when I did," he muttered, shaking his head. "You all right, kid?" I nodded weakly, but we both knew the truth. I wasn't all right. I wouldn't be all right for a long time. The police reviewed the security footage and everything was caught on camera. The moment Colton pulled the knife, the way he whispered my name like a deranged mantra, the way he lunged toward me, it was enough to charge him. But for how long? I quit my job the very next day. I left Albuquerque a week later, moving to a city where no one knew me, where I could pretend this had never happened. I tried to tell myself that Colton was gone, that he wouldn't find me, that his twisted obsession would eventually fade. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the world is still and I'm alone with my thoughts, I remember the way he looked at me. The tattoo with my name, the way he whispered, "I'll find you again." And no matter how far I run, I still feel like he's watching me.